Our family has declined. A soul from another world travels through and discovers that a distant relative has left behind a huge family inheritance and territory waiting for his inheritance. Only he knows that this is a place shrouded in despair. Bloodthirsty and cruel bandits, corrupt and twisted believers. The war machines that occupy the old road, the cannibal witches that corrupt the forest. The prophets of despair and the necromancers who blaspheme the dead. The wriggling and expanding flesh waste, as well as the twisted and distorted flesh mountain, are revered as kings. The detestable Dagon family members break free from the cursed ghost of the bottomless abyss. The monsters of the void are distorting reality, and the old gods are waiting for the stars to return. Whether seeking redemption, escaping the past, or pursuing fame and fortune, heroes from all walks of life unite under his command, bringing hope to this desperate world. Rescuing our family from the demon that greedily devours us, the darkest dungeon. Key words. Dark dungeons, Lord farming, Cthulhu, the Middle Ages, Dark Goths. Keywords of the novel. Our family decline. No pop-ups, Our family decline. Download the complete TXT collection, Our family decline. Latest chapter reading Chapter 1. Our family decline. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Our family decline. In a daze, Lin Bei seemed to have had a dream. In his dream, his name was Lance and he lived in a world similar to medieval society. Both parents are scholars studying ancient history, constantly wandering among various relics around the world, while he is entrusted to an old professor to take care of. Until news of his parents missing came from afar, and Lance grew up under the care of an old professor, influenced by the information left behind by his parents, becoming an ancient scholar. Just before Lance could graduate from college and embark on the path of finding his parents, a letter arrived in his hand. The messenger was an elderly man who claimed to be the butler. He had a hunched figure and a thin face, wearing a pair of worn-out round-framed glasses. Although his clothes were old, he could still vaguely see the glory of the past aristocracy. I don't know why watching his stiff smile gives people a terrifying feeling like a zombie just crawled out of a grave. He conveyed to me news from a family that I had never heard of before, that my noble distant relative had passed away, leaving behind a huge inheritance and vast territory waiting for my inheritance. Just as I was surprised by this good thing happening to me, the special mark on the wax seal of the letter made me feel uneasy. That is a mark with a half-arc divided by 5 short lines, and I searched through all the knowledge in my memory but couldn't distinguish it. Although I felt uncomfortable, for some reason I still opened the envelope, hoping to learn about my distant relatives and the inheritance. Until I saw that sentence. Our family has declined. I remember it, I remember everything. At this moment, I understand the terrifying truth of this world. The virtue of piercing the crown, This terrible game doesn't even allow me to dream. Lin Bei suddenly woke up like a nightmare, but the room he was familiar with was not in his eyes, and the violent jolt reminded him that he was constantly moving. Through the dim yellow glow of the chandelier, Lin Bei could see that it was a dimly lit wooden carriage, with 2 people sitting in front of him. A medieval knight wearing full armor, with a long sword leaning against him, and a cross pattern hanging in front of him indicates that he has a church background. Another man wearing an old hard fur coat wrapped a face scarf around his neck to cover half of his face below his eyes, with a short sword pinned to his waist and an antique short-barreled flint gun pinned to his waist. So much like the strange dream just now and the scene before, Lin Bei had a bad premonition. He lowered his head and looked at the clothes on his body. Outside was a medieval-style waist-up jacket with a fine linen lining inside and narrow pants and riding boots below. Turning his head to look out the window, there was only a dark and hazy area, and the glass mirror reflected a handsome young man with black hair, somewhat of a scholarly temperament. The lights hanging on the carriage were only 2 or 3 meters away from the darkness, but one could still vaguely see the twisted trees and randomly placed tombstones on the roadside. Isn't it? Seeing this, Lin Bei already knew what had happened, but still forced himself to find the letter from his body in search of final comfort. When he saw the first sentence, he could only accept reality. I have traveled on my own, and I have also traveled into the world of the game. Lin Bei, an ordinary person who was playing games in front of the computer 1 second ago, became Lance, the heir who was running on the old road the next second. But this discovery caused him a huge panic, with indescribable pressure like a boulder pressing on his chest, even his breath exhausting him, almost like heart failure. If he really went to accept the inheritance of the nobility, he could laugh to death. Although the Middle Ages were chaotic, inheriting the inheritance of the nobility was equivalent to jumping from an ordinary person to the nobility class at once, and then ruthless exploitation would be over. This kind of good thing can still be his turn. But the problem is that the main tone of the worldview in the game I am traveling through is despair and darkness. The main plot is about an ancestor who is tired of extravagant living and peeks into the ancient gods underground in his old house, then begins to explore and research, creating many troubles directly or indirectly in the process. After encountering the evil god sealed underground, the ancestor began to lay out in order to become a god. He left a letter and threw all the troubles to the game protagonist, asking him to carry out killings in the territory under the name of his family. All the creatures that died on this land will provide strength for the ancestor to become a god. Players will struggle against unimaginable enemies, famine, illness, and the pressure of constantly eroding their minds, ultimately killing their ancestors to prevent evil gods from descending and destroying the world. No one here knows better than him that what he inherits is not a noble territory, but a meat grinder that devours flesh and blood. There are hidden enemies, beasts, filth, demons, bloodline. Various demons and monsters, as well as struggles with famine, curses, plagues, and humanity. Being abused in the game at least preserves the opportunity to reopen and accumulate experience and strength, but if one lives in a world full of despair and destined to be destroyed, it is basically a dead end. Thinking of this, Lin Bei couldn't help but hold on to his thick black hair with both hands. I want to go home, torment, ding. The service you subscribe to is above the line, please check. But the sound that rang out from somewhere made him sweep away the restlessness just now, and instead, a look of ecstasy appeared. Looking at the panel in front of him, he understood that the cheat had been credited to his account. Name: Lance Hamlet. Occupation: Alien dependence level. Traveler equipment: Empty skills. Sacrifice: Sacrifice enemies to unknown entities in order to receive gifts of blessing. Consume gifts, bestow enhancements traits. Shelter: Your soul is protected from unknown existence and not eroded, ancient bloodline. The blood flowing through your body gives you inspiration far beyond that of ordinary people inheritor. The identity of a noble heir makes you convincing and natural talent. Your powerful talent improves your learning efficiency, so my name is Lance now, living in an era of information explosion in modern times. He has a strong ability to accept and seize information, and quickly accepted his current identity, while extracting some key points from the panel. Alien clan is a profession that has not been seen in the game. From the combination of the word clan and the skill is sacrifice, it can be seen that there is an unknown and powerful presence involved, which is probably the key to one's own travel and cheating. Level represents the quantification of strength, and in the game, the traveler is a level 0 whiteboard, with apprentices, warriors, elites, masters, champions, and legends on top of it. The difference between skills and traits lies in one being active and the other being passive, and traits can reflect their origin to some extent. And to some extent, shelter and innate talent correspond to immune pressure and experience doubling, respectively. Another corresponding aspect of the ancient bloodline is the particularity of the bloodline in Lance's body. It is not a good thing to have too much inspiration in a story with a Cthulhu myth background. I'm afraid there is some secret hidden in this family's bloodline, which is why our ancestors have shown extraordinary traits. With the blessing of blood wine, they can even glimpse the seal of evil gods buried deep underground. But all of this needs to be put aside for now. His first priority is to find a way to survive from this world. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Encountering attacks on old roads. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Encountering attacks on old roads. Looking up at the two again, my memory as Lance clearly remembers that they were the carriage guards hired by the teacher to escort me to the territory. And precisely matching the two subordinates of the game's opening lord, the outrageous coincidence made Lance feel as if there were two big hands pushing everything behind him in the dark. Wearing knight armor is the crusader Renard, and wearing a coat is the robber Disma. In the game background, the experiences of the two are somewhat vague. The only thing that can be confirmed is that they are both ruthless people who have killed countless people, but for some reason, they have embarked on the path of self-redemption, transitioning from killing to protecting others. However, reality is not like a game where loyalty is always present with just one click of the mouse. Whether one can leave the two behind will become the key to opening up the situation. It should be noted that the territory is not peaceful at all, and now they are the only cards in one's hand that can be played. Just as Lance was pondering, a burst sound came from somewhere that interrupted his thoughts. It's gunfire. Disma, who was originally dozing off with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes and revealed a sharp gaze. On the other side, Leonard also held his long sword, although still sitting, giving a feeling of about to charge. Bandits. The butler in front shouted and whipped hard, trying to urge the horses to accelerate and distance themselves from the bandits. The stimulated horse ran frantically, its speed rapidly accelerated amidst its intense hissing, and the jolt had reached an unbearable level for ordinary people. Lance felt like his brain was about to be shaken even. Just being too fast on this dilapidated road is not a good thing. Before he could react, it felt like he had collided with something, causing the entire carriage to feel suspended. The strong jolt stopped in an instant, but the next second it made a loud noise and then tilted and rolled to one side. The two people sitting opposite grabbed the seats in an instant and their figures were not greatly affected. But Lance crashed uncontrollably into the carriage as if he was not wearing a seatbelt, and it wasn't until the two of them pulled him out of the carriage that he woke up from the dizziness. "Are you okay?" Leonard's voice emanated from the helmet, which was a man's deep voice that became even more muffled under the action of the helmet. "It's okay." Without considering anything else, Lance quickly stood up to examine the situation in front of him. What he was worried about still happened. The car was traveling too fast and could fly up to the sky with just a small stone or pothole. When it hit the ground, it directly caused the axle to break, and the whole carriage rolled and threw all the items on the shelves scattered on the ground. These were the original owner's items, including some clothes and books. As for the butler and the horse pulling the cart, they have long disappeared. It should be the butler riding the horse and running away. The old road overturned, and Lance felt the dead memories attacking him. The bandits will come soon, we need to leave here quickly. Disma had already drawn out his flint shotgun and started loading, his eyes wary of the surrounding environment, wary of potential bandits. "It seems there's still a long way to reach the town." Leonard looked into the distance, the ancient road obscured by gloomy trees, and it's not clear how far away. "If you want to survive, you can't escape." Lance interrupted the two people who were discussing escaping, but his words were somewhat contrary to common sense. "What do you mean?" Disma looked at him with a strange expression, his distrust undisguised. Although Leonard didn't say anything, his gaze hidden under the helmet also showed a hint of doubt. Their attitudes have clearly changed, but without a reasonable explanation, no one will accompany him crazy. But Lance didn't pay much attention. If it weren't an accident, he already knew what would happen next. "Now that we don't have carriages and are not familiar with the environment, are you confident in escaping the bandits on foot? Once we are caught up, our physical and mental exhaustion will definitely be great, and the battle will only be more difficult. So fighting is inevitable, and if we want to survive, we must hold the initiative in our own hands." "Do you mean to actively attack the bandits? There are only 3 of us." Disma's words are actually quite polite. In fact, everyone understands that there are only two real combat forces, and they also need to protect Lance, this weak and uncontrollable employer. No, Lance shook his head slowly. A real big army can't plunder with just one gunshot. I estimate that a small group of only 4 or 5 people would plunder along the way. As long as our tactics are reasonable, this is not a difficult task. Speaking, Lance turned his head to look at Disma. How is your marksmanship? I never miss a shot, Disma blurted out without hesitation, clearly very confident in his marksmanship. I believe you, Lance smiled and nodded, then began to raise his hand and point to the surrounding environment to make arrangements. The tactics are very simple. The trees on both sides are our natural camouflage, we ambush and wait for the bandits to appear, and these goods attract them to stop. At that time, I need you to shoot and kill the bandits' musketeer first, then continue to load and kill what you think is the most threatening, maximize the advantage of our surprise attack, and not easily expose your position. Speaking, I watched as Renard was assigned tasks. When the gunfire rings, I will create movement on the other side to attract the enemy's attention. It not only gives him time to load a second bullet, but also leads the bandits into a trap. You're wearing armor that looks too obvious and inconvenient to move around, so I need you to ambush in the grass and try to cause casualties as much as possible when they are attracted by me. Disma originally thought that Lance's tactic was to lure the enemy away, while the knight stayed to protect him, just like the employers he had encountered before. But I never expected this person to take on the responsibility of being a bait voluntarily, which is equivalent to putting themselves in an extremely dangerous situation and placing safety on both of them. The long-lost trust made him feel unfamiliar, it was a feeling of blood pumping, and he had forgotten when it last appeared. Lance didn't pay much attention to Disma's abnormality, but waited for Leonard's answer. No problem, the holy light is guiding me. Leonard lifted his long sword, his actions indicating his attitude and willingness to carry out this dangerous mission. Upon hearing these words, Lance breathed a sigh of relief. If the bandits didn't have a gunman, they had to cross Leonard in order to attack him. Therefore, the only one who truly needed to face the bandits in this tactic was Leonard, and although he seemed dangerous, he didn't actually have much risk. Less than 2 minutes after the car overturned, Lance took control of the situation, and then the three of them ambushed in the dense forests on both sides of the road, waiting for the arrival of the bandits. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Ambush and Conspiracy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Ambush and Conspiracy. As expected, someone quickly rushed over, and as he expected, there were only 4 people in total. 2 were holding daggers, 1 was holding a long-barreled flint gun, and the other was even more burly than the others, holding a simple 9-tailed whip in his hand and a flint pistol inserted around his waist. There's no one in the big car. A bandit approached to investigate the carriage and turned to shout towards the rear. Quick! Catch up, they won't be able to run far. The strong man didn't hesitate to raise the whip forward. However, the younger brother focused his attention on the scattered boxes and cabinets on the ground, clearly hoping to open the boxes and change money more than looking for someone. His mother. What can this crap do? As long as you get rid of that man, you will benefit from it. Under the urging of the strong man, several people regained their greedy gaze. As the team was about to move forward, a thunderous explosion erupted, and the gunman standing in the back of the line overturned and fell to the ground, unsure of his life or death. Who? The bandit shouted out in confusion as he looked around the dark forest, but at that moment, Lance stood up according to plan to create movement in the dense forest. Over there, don't let him run. The strong man rushed forward without hesitation, not forgetting to motivate him. Hurry up. Whoever kills him will be rewarded 100. Upon hearing this, the 2 hesitant little brothers were also excited to keep up, and even ran faster than a strong man under the incentive of the bounty. Kill him. The bounty is mine. Lance walked quickly in the dense forest, turning his head to see the almost crazy actions of the bandits chasing after him. He was also frightened and had to accelerate his pace. For the bandits, Lance's reaction stirred up their ferocity. They were enjoying the pleasure of hunting, they were hunters, and Lance was a fleeing prey. Just as they were focusing their attention on Lance, a figure suddenly appeared in the nearby bushes and shouted loudly. "In the name of the holy light!" Leonard charged with his sword, like an unstoppable spear inserted into the enemy's formation. Without any defense, the sword pierced through the bandit walking at the front. Without any pause, Leonard directly grabbed the unlucky ghost's body with one foot and drew out his long sword, charging his backhand towards the other. The sudden killing of Renard caused chaos in the bandit formation. He watched as another bandit, who had been pierced by him, turned around and wanted to escape. However, just as he had time to turn around, he was beheaded by the long-sword owl, his head flying into the air, and he died without closing his eyes. His body took 2 steps before collapsing. The deaths of his 2 subordinates in a short period of time did not make the strong man shrink back, and he even took out the pistol from his waist during the time his subordinates fought with their lives. And the muzzle was already aimed at Leonard. "Be careful!" Lance shouted towards the other side immediately upon seeing this. His fear of firearms has continued to this day, so when he saw this scene, his heart felt as if it had been tightened. Bang! The gun was in someone else's hands, and even if Lance was worried, he couldn't change the fact. At the moment when the headless corpse fell, the gunshot still occurred. However, what surprised him was that it wasn't Leonard but a strong man who let out a scream. His hand holding the gun seemed to have been hit by something and became bloody, and the gun fell directly to the ground. "It seems I didn't come too late," Disma stormed into the battlefield from the other side, his gun still carrying smoke. At this moment, Leonard had already reacted, and just as he swung his sword again to strike, Lance's voice came from behind. "Stay alive!" Leonard turned from chopping to smashing the strong man's head heavily with his sword hilt, directly knocking him down while he was still howling. "Why not kill it?" Disma asked as he looked at Lance walking by. "Don't you think it's strange?" Lance raised his hand to comfort the 2 of them. They didn't show any intention of stopping after seeing the collapsed carriage and scattered goods, but continued to chase us with a strong purpose. "Perhaps they think we have taken away valuable things, and things won't run away here," Disma explained from their perspective. Lance just smiled at this and picked up the dagger on the ground to play with the 2 corpses. A bandit who lives in the wilderness all year round has such clean clothes, no dirt on his fingernails, no traces of holding weapons in his palms for a long time, and no traces of wind and sun on his face. "And you see," he handed the dagger to Disma as a signal for him to check. "The blade of this weapon is too new, with no signs of battle on it, as if it had just been taken out of a blacksmith's shop." After taking it, Disma found that it was indeed so, but who would pay attention to it in the darkness? Only when Lance mentioned it did the 2 people react. "Are you saying these people are not bandits?" Lance searched the strong man and took out scattered coins from his pocket. He also found a brass badge and showed it to the 2 of them. "It's a police badge." Disma blurted out the origin of this thing. "But the person who holds this kind of thing should be a security officer responsible for maintaining local security. How can they become bandits who block the way and rob?" For a moment, the situation became even more complicated and confusing. "What's going on?" "So I need him to help me answer some questions." Lance picked up the bloody pistol on the ground and looked coldly at the fallen strong man. "Tell me, who asked you to kill me? Can you live after saying it?" Lance was not polite and directly aimed his gun at him. "Are you negotiating terms with me?" "Mayor. It's all the mayor who asked me to do it, and I have no choice but to obey." In the face of death threats, the strong man immediately abandoned the last bit of hesitation and betrayed the mayor. "Is there only the mayor?" Lance remained calm about this, as if he had anticipated it earlier. "And those farmers, they are very dissatisfied with the arrival of adults. Betrayal has no bottom line at the beginning, and this person didn't hesitate to reveal the situation, while Lance was able to understand the situation in town. The previous lord died and the bandits sealed off the road. The mayor secretly and together with the farmer, raised the price of grain to harvest ordinary people. And when he heard that the heir to the territory was about to return, the mayor immediately arranged for him to bring a few thugs to ambush here, hoping to disguise himself as a bandit and kill the heir, and then let him kill those thugs, and the town would be the mayor's. You didn't lie to me. I have really said everything, there is not a single word that dares to deceive adults. Then you can go die. As soon as the words fell, Lance pulled the trigger and the flint on the hammer struck the fire door, creating a string of sparks. However, there was no gunshot as he remembered it, only the disappearance of Mars. There are no bullets in the gun. And in the moment he was stunned, the strong man immediately stood up and flew over to try to hold him hostage. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Family Evil Gods and the End Times. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Family Evil Gods and the End Times. Seeing Lance suddenly approaching, he panicked and instinctively controlled his body to retreat. As he was about to grab himself, a long sword pierced through the strong man's chest from the side. As Leonard drew his long sword, the strong man fell to the ground as if losing his support, and the light in his eyes dissipated with the passage of time. Lance also reacted and stabilized his figure. Looking at the corpses on the ground, he couldn't help but feel scared. If he really wanted to catch them, things might be troublesome. It was blood that soaked the gunpowder, Disma explained as he saw the problem with the gun. Lifting the gun in his hand, Lance realized that he lacked knowledge of firearms and forgot that he now had a flint gun. I also made a big mistake, which is that the weapon I took from someone else's hand was not checked. As the last person died, the temporary team of 3 entered a eerie atmosphere, clearly waiting for Lance's explanation. I know you have many doubts, but my next words may break your understanding of this world, so are you sure you want to understand the truth about this world? Speak up quickly. Disma was filled with curiosity in his heart, and he couldn't wait to know. Okay, then. Lance adjusted his mindset a little before speaking slowly. I come from a very ancient family, whose history can be traced back thousands of years. My ancestors, as inheritors, enjoyed luxurious and decadent aristocratic life. Until one day he received divine revelation, and in his dream he learned of an ancient evil god that had been sealed. Once he awakened, the world would be destroyed. The ancestors believed that this was a responsibility he had to shoulder, so he gave up his corrupt life and spent money on building an exploration team. After countless hardships, he finally found the position of the sealed evil god in the dream. The ancestor led the family knights to clear the monsters and open up this barren territory, but soon he realized that it was a cursed place. The power of evil gods was too strong, even in a seal, it would corrupt everything. Whether it is animals or plants, even dead objects in this cursed place are corrupted into monsters, and the power of evil gods also distorts reality to attract the gaze of those void monsters. Those monsters are like weeds, one group will soon give birth to another. The ancestors knew this was an endless path, but in order to protect the seal, they fought against evil all their lives. They swore that the members of the family must defend the seal with their lives until they fought against evil to the end. After many years, family members have basically fallen into confrontation with monsters to protect the seal, and my parents have done the same. I was raised in someone else's house since childhood and never met my parents until I reached adulthood. Speaking of which, Lance stopped to observe their reactions. Although they are all ruthless people, they still appear somewhat difficult to understand or disbelieve when faced with information such as divine revelation, evil gods, and world destruction, and can only digest it with silence. Lance noticed their attitude and comforted them with a smile. I didn't believe it at first because the sealed information couldn't be leaked, only the inheritor had the right to know. It wasn't until the previous lord disappeared, and as the only remaining member of the family, the mission of the family finally fell on me along with the transmission of blood, and I also gained divine enlightenment to know everything. Why do you want to tell us this? I'm just an ordinary mercenary, Disma seemed to recoil. Because I need your help, Lance said sincerely. You have also seen that corruption has begun to spread, and the seal is in danger. Even if I have the determination to clear evil and protect the seal, I am only alone. Perhaps I died inexplicably as soon as I inherited the territory. Why not seek help from the kingdom or the church? Leonard asked a question. Because my territory only has monsters and no coins. Lance's one sentence directly silenced Leonard. Disma regretted hearing it a bit. It wasn't something he should have known. He just wanted to finish the task quickly and then take the money to a tavern or brothel to numb himself with alcohol and body, so that he would forget everything the next day when he woke up. Until the end of the world came. I don't want to die here. Selfish, feeling the repulsion between the two, he could only sigh. I know it's difficult, and I might even lose my life because of it. When I first learned about the family mission, I also thought about avoiding it. But there are always things that need to be done by someone. Instead of waiting in panic all day long for the arrival of evil gods at the end of the world, it's better to put in a fight. Even if we fail, we will at least work hard without leaving any regrets and not live in panic. Disma hesitated, listening to Lance's words, whether it was the family that had fought for thousands of years to protect the seal, or Lance, an ordinary scholar who dared to bear suffocating pressure at this time, couldn't help but feel admiration. He is thin and frail in stature, but standing in front of him is as majestic and inviolable as a mountain, while in contrast, he is like a mouse in a ditch. Complex emotions are tormenting Disma's heart, and he also wants to live like Lance. Leonard stood aside. No one knew what the person under the armor was thinking. Even if you don't join, it's okay. I can understand, just like my parents didn't want me to be involved when they sent me away. I'm telling you this in the hope that after my death, someone will still know the story of our family. At least I have fulfilled my ancestors' oath to protect the last person in the Sealing War. I, Lance, did not let the name Hamlet be ashamed. Lance's words were like a sharp knife piercing into Disma's fragile heart, and after the disguise shattered, he only felt a strong sense of guilt filling it. Why are you always avoiding? Why? I can do it. I will find my own redemption. In the process of self-exploration, another stronger emotion began to emerge, as if a faint arc had been seen. Humph. Disma's mood became high as he waved his gun and sword in his hand. There's no way out, let's go ahead. The holy light is incredibly steadfast, and so am I. Leonard raised his long sword, even if he perishes with that impure evil. Upon hearing their words, Lance couldn't help but laugh. He knew he had made the right bet, and both had a strong tendency towards self-redemption. I immediately took an oath with the two of them to guard this secret, which filled the ritual and made them feel the sense of carrying a mission. In fact, most of these criticisms were made up by Lance. He knew that in order to gain support, he had to assume a lofty, even savior, identity, and awaken the two's desire for redemption through dedication and sacrifice. Anyway, even if his ancestors were dead, no one could reveal his words. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Sacrifice. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Sacrifice. However, those corrupt and void monsters are real, evil gods are also real, and waking up to destroy the world is also real. The only difference is that the culprit behind all of this is actually the old ancestor. To confront them, one must have a certain understanding of these things, and they must be told sooner or later. And the heroic story they built themselves will give them enough spiritual support, at least not to collapse and run away when encountering monsters. The story just now will only be a screening, and the real core will come next. Don't be so pessimistic. Actually, my family has left me with some strength to fight against evil. Lance set his gaze on a corpse and then raised his hand to touch it. Sacrifice. When activated, the just deceased body collapsed and was devoured by darkness, leaving only clothing and fragments in place. As the performer, Lance could see light dots floating from the void drilling into himself. At this moment, he felt like his body was like a bottle, with some light spots floating irregularly inside. Originally, Lance didn't understand what the so-called gift in the skill description meant, but now he finally understands the changes that sacrifice brings to himself. Gifts, that is, those light points, can be understood as experience points or energy bars. Blessing, on the other hand, can strengthen the body by consuming gifts, which actually means upgrading and even strengthening objects. More importantly, blessings not only strengthen himself, but can also be used by others outside of him. In other words, as long as the gifts are sufficient, he can build a powerful army. Lance keenly felt that this was the key to establishing himself in this world. Consume all the gifts. As the body's radiance disappears, a warm current appears out of thin air and flows through the body. The exhaustion accumulated from running around just now is directly swept away, and the haggard anxiety is dispelled by the constantly emerging force. He intuitively felt that his body was getting stronger, but that feeling disappeared in an instant. Lance understood that he needed more gifts. Disma and Leonard were both surprised to see this scene, which was beyond their understanding. If it weren't for the vaccination just now, they would probably be chopping Lance like a monster now. Noticing their reactions, they waited until they also sacrificed the other 2 corpses before explaining. That evil god is the god of flesh and blood. He corrupts and attracts monsters to make them fight. Every creature that dies in this area has its flesh and blood to provide him with strength. Therefore, killing enemies alone is not enough, and the remaining corpses need to be cleared. The ancestor obtained mysterious and powerful abilities in the divine revelation, and in the long-term confrontation, family members were able to rely on the power of their bloodline to perform. The ancestor left behind an ancient ritual to thoroughly purify the enemy's flesh and blood, in order to prevent the power of evil gods from becoming stronger and breaking free from the seal. Of course, Lance could not claim to have sacrificed the body, but it is more acceptable to change it to purification. In fact, the ancestor was indeed planning to become a god by relying on the power of flesh and blood, and sacrificing the body to some extent was truly weakening the ancestor's power. Fortunately, the previous story had an impact, and although they had never seen such a strange ceremony before, they still chose to believe it. Don't be surprised, there are still many magical things in this cursed land, and you will see more incredible things in the future. Lance didn't continue, but picked up the clothes on the ground and wiped away the bloodstains on the gun. Along with the strong man's gun medicine bag, he tied it to his belt. The scholar's temperament suddenly became a bit more violent. Returning to the carriage, Lance sacrificed the body of the gunman, feeling the added light in his body. He was like a miser watching the gold coins come in, feeling a sense of fulfilled security. However, he did not immediately use these gifts, and the weak reinforcement did not have much effect. Instead, he accumulated them as if he had insurance. The scattered boxes were mostly filled with miscellaneous items from his predecessor, which were of little use to Lance. The truly important inheritance certificate that could prove his identity was with him. Pick some and stuff them into a suitcase, throw the long-barreled flint gun to Disma, and he is the only one among them who can use it. Afterwards, pile up all the rest in the bushes of the dense forest, and if you can find it, it doesn't matter if you can't find it. Quickly and decisively burning it, Lance watched as Xiongxiong's burning flames engulfed the carriage with the national emblem. Without hesitation, he turned around with his suitcase and greeted the 2 of them. "Let's go. Take over as Hamlet. I don't know how far I have traveled along the old road." When the dawn rises from the sky, the sunlight tears through the thick clouds and drives the darkness away from this land. At this moment, Lance vaguely sees the human buildings in the distance. Finally arrived. The experience along the way made Lance understand why there are limitations to this backpack in the game. He can feel tired just by carrying this thing for a while. If it weren't for the side effects of constantly strengthening his body through blessings to dispel fatigue, he might still be procrastinating. But this also consumed a small amount of gifts, and now he only wants to find the runaway butler and shoot him dead. "Dare to snatch my horse. Before continuing, Lance stopped the two of them and took out two small leather bags from his pocket, handing them each. Their mission this time is to send themselves to the town, with a total reward of 1,000 copper coins and 500 for each person. This money is still provided by Lance's teacher, who is the old professor who raised him. According to the conversion of this world monetary system, 1 gold coin equals 20 silver coins equals 240 copper coins. 1,000 is 4 gold coins plus 40 copper coins. Don't look like it's rare, but in this world of low productivity, the purchasing power of currency is very strong. In Lance's memory, an ordinary handicraft worker in the city earns only 3 copper coins a day for hard work, and only some technical positions can offer a better salary of 5 copper coins per day. The teacher who works as a professor in the university, Lance, earns 5 gold coins per month and is also considered a high-paying class in big cities. As for serfs, they may not even have the opportunity to see coins and are exploited by farmers like slaves. As long as they can survive hunger, it is already good. Just neither of them took it, but looked at Lance with some confusion. "Take it, this is your task reward," Lance emphasized. "Lord, what does this mean?" Disma felt a bit angry and humiliated. "I swore allegiance to you to kill evil. But as long as you're human, you have to eat, right? Your equipment also needs to be maintained, right? You can't let me fight evil with you hungry and holding tattered weapons, can you?" Lance smiled and comforted, "Since you're with me, then I'm responsible for you. This is my responsibility and our goal does not conflict." As he spoke, he stuffed the money bag into their hands. Now is the time to buy people's hearts. Lance cannot save money and cause animosity between the two. It's funny to be frugal when it comes to saving money. Under Lance's persuasion, the two of them accepted the commission before entering the small town of Hamlet. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Welcome to Hamlet. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Welcome to Hamlet. After crossing a stone bridge across the river, Lance and his team finally arrived at Hamlet town. Upon entering the small town of Lance, one can feel the depression here. Unlike the city in memory, most of the town is crowded with small and rudimentary wooden houses, with only thatched roofs covering the wind and rain. There were not many people on the street in the early morning, only a few squatting or lying in the corners of the building, wearing old and tattered coarse linen clothes. They looked pale, skinny, and had empty eyes, losing all hope as if waiting for death. In the small town, there are still traces of war, large areas of destroyed and collapsed houses, and the burnt black left by the flames are still clearly visible. It is difficult to imagine how dangerous the situation was at that time. As for the population, it is even more depressed, with some houses left empty and only messy scenes, and it is unclear what has happened. Lance could only curse inwardly upon seeing this scene. Lao Tzu is really a waste, leaving himself such a mess. Lord, what should we do now? Disma also realized that this place was not easy to get around with. First, eat something and settle down. Let's wait until we have a good rest. Lance began to delve deeper into the town and found that the situation was actually slightly better than he had imagined. Although the building was also made of thatched roofs, the main structure had changed from wooden to mud and gravel walls, which at least looked slightly stronger. However, the ground is still muddy, and some people dumped their excrement directly onto the streets, causing a foul odor to spread. Lance had to be careful to avoid those dirt, and every step he took was mentally tormented. The layout of Hamlet town is very simple. Rather than being a town, it is more like a small fishing village, and the town can only be seen slightly near the central square. The towering brick and stone buildings around the square still offer a glimpse of the town's former glory, but as time passes, only dilapidation remains today. All buildings have suffered varying degrees of damage, and the power of war is fully demonstrated. Let's go to the tavern. It's still quite early at this time, and Lance was afraid that the building would suddenly collapse when he pushed open the tavern door. There was no one above the bar, only a young man in the shape of a shop assistant wiping the tables and chairs. "Good morning, 3 customers." The shop assistant shouted when they saw the 3 people coming in. "What's there to eat?" "In the morning, there is vegetable stew, stewed meat with potatoes, black bread, as well as chicken and fish." Although he learned from the bandit leader that the town mayor had raised the price of grain, Lance was still surprised by the price of food here. Black bread is made from a mixture of various coarse grains such as bran and pea flour. Due to fermentation issues, it has a sour taste, and the taste is like chewing wood chips, which is difficult to swallow. In the city, 1 copper coin can buy 2 pounds of soft and sweet white bread, and 1 pound of beef is only 3.4 copper coins. Black bread, which is not even eaten by pigs, costs 1 copper coin per pound here, and pork is even priced at the same price as beef. As for beef, he can't afford anything he has, let alone those ordinary people. 3 portions of vegetable stew, 3 portions of fish, and give them both a glass of ale. The dishes were served, and at that moment Lance saw the face under Leonard's helmet. With a thick beard on his face, he looked in his 30s, but his face looked haggard and he had a sad expression with an inexplicable sense of shame. However, his eyes still harbored the blazing power of the holy light. "But now I'm really starving and Lance can't control so much. Let's eat first before we talk." Just as they were eating, a ragged, disheveled person with a dirty face and a hunched body broke into the tavern. "Hey! What are you doing in here? When the boss sees me, I'll be in bad luck." The clerk didn't even bother wiping the table and quickly stood up to stop the person, but still couldn't stop their shouting. "Please give me something to eat, I'm willing to do anything." Lance only then recognized from his voice that she was a woman, but she also looked very weak. The strange person was quickly kicked out by the salesperson, who quickly came over to apologize to several people. "Sorry to disturb the guest, she is also a pitiful person. Please don't mind." Oh, Lance suddenly became interested and asked, "What's wrong with this person?" But before the salesperson could finish speaking, the commotion coming from the door caught Lance's attention again. "How unlucky to see you in the early morning." At the entrance of the tavern, a haughty thug was shouting and cursing, kicking him with his foot. The strange person collapsed and curled up, letting his fists and feet fall on him. The clerk quickly walked out upon seeing the situation, enduring the insults of the thug while also praising him with a smile before bringing him into the store, and the strange person was able to escape. The thug pushed the door and entered, mocking the clerk with a dissatisfied expression on his face. "How did you do it, even this?" Before he could finish speaking, he seemed to notice Lance's gaze and shouted fiercely at them. "What are you looking at?" But upon discovering that they were strangers, he became interested, not to mention that Lance was white and had a greedy gaze, as if seeing a wild wolf from a fat sheep walking towards them. "I am the sheriff here, and now I suspect you are bandits. Let me investigate." Without waiting for him to finish speaking, he immediately became mute because Disma's gun was already aimed at him. Lance looked at Disma holding a gun in one hand and eating with a spoon in the other, without even glancing at the thug, showing a disdainful expression. But the thug stood still and dared not speak, his survival instinct warning him that this person really dared to shoot. How could adults do that? They just passed by here and will be leaving soon. The salesperson broke the strange atmosphere and gave him a step. "Where's the food? You've made me want to die waiting for so long, haven't you?" At this moment, he could only vent his anger on the clerk and curse a few times, but he dared not provoke the Lance and others again. Yes, right away." The shop assistant smiled and immediately turned back to take out the food, quickly sending the thug away. At this moment, the shop assistant immediately rushed to the side of the Lance group to persuade them. "He must have just come out of the brothel. After you finish eating, hurry up and leave. In case he calls someone over, it will be troublesome." "Exactly." Lance didn't care and said, placing a copper coin on the table, instead asking the clerk. We passed by and found this small town a bit strange. There are some things we need to ask you, as long as you answer well, this is yours. If you ask the customer, I will definitely answer. The shop assistant smiled compliantly, his eyes unconsciously floating on the copper coin. This place is not like a city. All he can earn in a day is a full meal, and he has never seen any money before, but even this job is still being pursued by someone. How did this town become like this? Originally, the town was okay, but recently the bandits. Quickly, Lance learned about the situation. Half a month ago, bandits attacked the town, burned, killed, looted, and the population of the town sharply decreased. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Situation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Situation. After the bandits finished the robbery, they did not leave, but instead stayed on the old road and often blocked the way to rob. After the commercial road was cut off, the prices in the small town skyrocketed, and there was a shortage of food, leading to famine. Moreover, the sudden imposition of a security tax by the town mayor has made it even more difficult for ordinary people, as some free people are forced to sell themselves to farmers in order to survive. What about your lord? Isn't there a militia group in such a big town? I don't know where the nobleman went. There are militia groups, but when the bandits attacked, most of them died, and even if they didn't die, they ran away, leaving only a few. The clerk's expression became more cautious as he spoke, and after looking back to make sure there were no people around, he whispered, "The rest have become the kind of security officers we had just now. It's best for customers to stay away if they encounter them." Lance understood the meaning behind his words. The mayor had initially gathered many mercenaries to resist the bandits, and after the war, these mercenaries and surviving militia became security officers. In fact, they are the thugs controlled by the mayor in the town, and their behavior in the town is even more detestable than bandits. What about the church? Hey, the salesperson laughed. After the bandits retreated, the church and the mercenary guild left the town. Now the church and guild are both empty. Renard's expression changed slightly upon hearing these words, and his resolute face couldn't help but show a hint of disappointment, but he didn't say much. The situation in the small town is not optimistic. Firstly, there are a large number of serfs occupying the farm estate, and the farmer holds most of the town's food in his hands. The second is the mayor of a security regiment composed of mercenaries and thugs. Normally, one should first find the butler and determine their identity. But Lance understands that it will definitely startle the guy from the mayor. There are only 3 of him, and the strong dragon will not suppress the local snakes. He will still have to limit himself when the time comes. What about that woman? Lance continued to ask the strange person just now, and the salesperson also showed a helpless expression. Alas, it's not because of this banditry. Originally, her family of 3 was quite good, but when the bandits attacked, both her husband and son died, leaving her alone to live. I don't know if she went crazy either. I heard that she dragged a seriously injured veteran out of the ruins and brought him home for treatment. The priest needed money to save him. In order to raise money, she sold the veteran's equipment, but she didn't expect to be snatched by the mercenaries and tortured for a whole night before being thrown out of the street. At this time, the priest who could use magic had already left with the church, and she went completely crazy. By picking up the leftover garbage from mercenaries, I helped save some fish gill organs for her to survive. Veteran. Lance noticed the words spoken by the clerk. That's right, that mercenary used to be a soldier. When the bandits attacked, he was the only one who stood up and led us to resist them. However, judging from the situation at that time, he was also seriously injured and may have died long ago. Disma and Leonard were both deeply moved upon hearing this story. This is yours. Lance threw the copper coin over and then took out another copper coin and threw it at the clerk. Take another pound of black bread away. The clerk seemed to realize Lance's meaning, but didn't say much, just shook his head and went back to the backstage. I'm going to take a look, what do you two say? Lance knew that he didn't actually have much combat power, and most of the pistols in his waist were just a deterrent, and someone had to follow him to walk in town. The holy light protects me, Leonard put on his helmet. I'm sure there's no problem with that. Disma drank the last bit of beer in one gulp. Lance walked out of the tavern and saw the woman crouching at the door, so he took the initiative to approach. Although she had just wanted to get closer, she didn't know why her expression twisted and she looked very frightened. Her figure tightened and she hugged herself tightly, afraid to look up at Lance again. Lance didn't make much movement, just squatted down and slowly handed over the black face bag wrapped in paper. Don't be afraid, we won't harm you. Take it and eat it. The woman looked up at the bag and slowly turned her gaze towards Lance. She was momentarily stunned by the smile on his face, but quickly realized and grabbed the bag before fleeing. Did you just leave like this? Disma frowned and asked, wanting to stop him, but was stopped by Lance raising his hand. On this land, there are all hardworking people. It seems that corruption has begun, and our task is very difficult. Speaking, Lance just started to follow up, and only Disma still asked a question in confusion. Lord, why are we doing this? We are all outsiders, and the locals don't even know us. To establish a foothold here, we need to have a connection with the locals, and the only mercenary willing to protect civilians in war is of great value to us. Originally, Lance was still struggling with how to get into this small town, but after hearing the woman's story, he finally had a plan. His idea is very simple. He wants to borrow the reputation of this veteran among the common people, but the specific situation still needs to be seen on site before making a decision. The three of them hung behind the woman and arrived at a civilian house, watching her hurriedly enter. It can be seen that the woman's family situation was once relatively good, otherwise there would not have been this single mudslide structure house. Unfortunately, a sudden war destroyed everything. The door was not locked, just lightly closed, but as soon as he approached the house and had not yet entered, he could smell a faint stench. Thinking of what the clerk had said, he even suspected that the mercenary had died, and that it was the smell emanating from the decaying body. Looking at the other two people, it seems that they also think the same way, but those who have come here have no intention of leaving directly. It's just beginning now, and people who can't adapt to it are not suitable to stay here. Lance took the lead in pushing the door and entered, only to pass through it. The foul smell suddenly became 100 times stronger and burst into his nose, causing Lance, who had just finished eating, to feel a bit nauseous. But he also saw what was happening inside the house. The woman cut open her wrist and let blood drip into the person lying on the bed. However, the three of Lance suddenly broke in and alarmed the woman. She let out a strange cry and fell to the ground, but soon stood up again, lifting the iron plate as a deterrent. Hurry up and leave my house. Don't be afraid, we're not those mercenaries. Lance dropped a sentence and approached the woman directly. When a woman saw Lance approaching, she really went crazy and raised an iron plate about to smash it. Leonard couldn't have watched as he was about to move forward, but Lance raised his hand and stopped him, then opened his arms and turned towards the woman. If you want to fight, then fight. I have an inescapable responsibility for you becoming like this. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Veterans, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Veterans. Now it was the woman's turn to appear hesitant. She remembered Lance's smile just now, which was something she had never dared to crave. At this moment, she couldn't help but tremble when faced with his pitiful face. Sorry, we're late. Lance fearlessly seized the opportunity to embrace the woman and gently comforted her. There won't be those things again in the future. I'll protect you, I'll make you eat enough, I'll. As she spoke, she secretly bestowed a faint blessing on her, and a warm current emerged from the woman's heart, awakening the already dry tears. Suddenly, she lost control and burst into tears like a breach of a dam, and the iron plate in her hand fell to the ground. Renard couldn't help but be shocked by this scene, and his hand gripping the hilt couldn't help but tighten. He remembered the compassionate image of the Virgin holding her son that he saw in the church when he was a child, and at that moment, it overlapped with Reims. Is this the Savior? Even the rugged character of Disma was a great shock, as no nobleman would ever be willing to approach dirty commoners, let alone embrace them. Nobles are not wrong, but this man chooses to take on responsibilities that do not belong to him, confessing to the common people and even allowing them to beat and curse. At this moment, Disma only felt a steady stream of strength emerging from his already tired body, and he knew he would surely follow the Lord's glory for redemption. Seeing it, Lance stopped pretending and let go of the woman. To be honest, when he grew up in modern society, he was somewhat obsessed with cleanliness. He still disliked women's dirty and tattered clothes touching him, not to mention the sour and rotten smell on his body. However, in order to create his character, he had to endure it. After pacifying the woman, Lance went to the bedside to scrutinize the man lying on top. His beard and hair turned gray, and he was already very old at first glance. His face turned pale like a dead person, and his right eye was covered by a black eye mask. There was a very obvious wound on his right shoulder, covered with a piece of torn cloth. Lance frowned and lifted the rag, revealing the ulcerated and purulent wound inside. Surprisingly still alive, Disma was somewhat surprised. That's right, if it were an ordinary person with such a serious injury and enduring so many days of illness and torment, he would have died long ago. Now this person is still alive, although his breath is so weak that it is almost imperceptible. There are indeed signs of life. She's taking care of him, otherwise even if he's physically strong, he won't be able to defeat the sickle of death. Lance looked around and evaluated the environment before turning to the woman. Why did you save him? Are women crazy? After everything she went through in the eyes of those townspeople, she really went crazy. Otherwise, how could she even want to save someone if she couldn't eat enough? But Lance could feel more like she was falling into some kind of hysteria, pouring her feelings for her deceased husband and son onto this mercenary. If he doesn't die, it means his husband and son are still alive. But in fact, she herself knew it was just an emotional attachment. Now that Lance had stirred up the situation, she realized the truth, otherwise she wouldn't have cried out like she collapsed. Because he saved my son. As the woman slowly approached, the three of Lance also heard stories that were somewhat different from those of the store clerk. The bandits did not attack the town from the beginning. Before that, they only suddenly appeared on the old road, robbing passing caravans. Those caravans recruited mercenaries to protect them for safety, which actually stimulated the town's economy. Many mercenaries came to make a living. However, the bandits suddenly began attacking the town half a month ago, and the mayor directly recruited strong men from the town residents. The woman's husband was one of the ones who was taken by the mayor to become a militia. There is a team of church knights and pastors in the town church. Although they did not mobilize, there is still a sense of intimidation. In addition, the mercenaries who came to make a living and the militia forcibly recruited by the mayor actually resisted the bandits' attack from the beginning, and there was a tug of war between the two. One of these mercenaries is an experienced veteran. While the other mercenaries are indulging in extravagance, he organizes militia and town residents in the square to explain his training methods. All those who want to learn self-protection skills are encouraged to participate. Until one day the war broke out without any warning, but this time the bandits pulled a few cannons from somewhere and directly defeated the town's defense forces, breaking in to burn, kill, and loot. The knights of the church retreated to the church, the mayor ran away, and the woman's husband died in the first battle, torn apart by shells. Only the veterans led the remaining militia to defend and cover the retreat of the town residents. In the battle, the veteran was stabbed by bandits with a sword to protect her son, but a shell hit and ultimately took his life. The veteran collapsed on the battlefield. She did not follow those people to escape, but instead took advantage of the chaos and dragged the veteran back to the collapsed ruins of the building to escape the bandits. After the bandits left, they dragged the old soldiers back home, and of course, their son. Lance followed the woman's gaze and looked at the straw mat covered in the corner of the room. He hadn't noticed it before, but now he knew without saying what was inside. It seemed that this was the source of the foul odor. Lance let out a sigh and, under the gaze of several people, lifted the straw mat. The already decayed body appeared before everyone's eyes, with a skeleton that looked like 6 or 7 years old. It has to be said that the impact is very strong. Even though Lance is mentally prepared, this moment still makes him feel the cruelty of this world. That's the fear of death, and when Disma saw the child's body, he was even more excited than Lance, gritting his teeth and shouting, "I must cut open their throats." However, Lance had no intention of being scared by this and instead turned around to look at the crowd and said sternly, "Anger can blind your eyes, calmness is the blade we use to kill evil." Disma's excitement subsided, and at this moment Lance turned to look at the woman. The deceased has passed away, but the living still need to live. Now, please let us give the child the final piece. The woman looked at the corpse with tears in her eyes again, and finally nodded in agreement, but the next second she turned her head to cover her face and cry, "No madam, please take a look." Lance guided her to look at the body, while he solemnly approached the body and raised his hand, muttering words. "I will give you rest." Sacrifice initiated. The child's body was devoured by the void in the next second, and in the woman's eyes, her child's bones disappeared instantly. This scene immediately stunned her, but the next second she instinctively wanted to come over. "Child! My child! Don't worry, he has entered the kingdom of God, where there will be no more war and death, no more hunger and disease, and he will always be happy." Is it really? Really, end of this chapter. Chapter 9. Start of action. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Start of action. Lance calmed the woman down while feeling the feedback from the void, unsure if it was due to being left for too long or being a child, as there were too few bandits compared to before. However, it can be considered a waste, so there is no doubt about it. Lance noticed the wound on her wrist, and seeing the dense yet unhealed cuts on it, he knew what this woman had experienced in the past 10 days, which made him feel a bit uncomfortable. Immediately, she picked up her hand, took out her handkerchief to bandage the wound, and took this opportunity to explain her identity to the woman. Lance Hamlet, the legitimate heir of the Hamlet territory, and Lance also learned that a woman's name is Susan. Susan was obviously a bit hard to believe that no noble lord would treat them like this, but the proof from Disma and Leonard confirmed Lance's identity as a great lord. This makes Susan feel even more distressed. Why is he only here now? If it were my husband and son earlier, they wouldn't have died. Lance also noticed this and looked a bit disappointed. In the game, he was able to treat everyone as consumables for completing levels. He thought he could treat these people like game characters, but it wasn't until he delved deeper that he realized he was also emotional. "Hurt my people, I swear I will make those bandits pay the price of bleeding." Lance stood up and made a vow, his stern face making Disma feel a hint of coldness and couldn't help but agree. "I will be your sharp blade. Our strength is still very weak now, we need to accumulate strength." Lance knew that anger could not achieve great things and quickly calmed down. He looked at the old soldier lying in bed and said, "He needs our help. This degree of injury has already moved beyond the general stage, and the bandages that Leonard and his team learned on the battlefield are obviously not suitable for this. Start the pot and boil water." Everyone is modern and has a certain understanding of basic medical care. Lance ordered a few people to start busy, clearing out a slightly cleaner area, and then took out a soft lining, tore it open into strips of cloth, and threw it into boiling water. After disinfecting the wound with a small knife, remove the carrion near the wound and wipe it with a cloth. In this era without anesthesia, this kind of surgery is basically deadly, but fortunately, the veteran fainted and lost consciousness. The wound was quickly cleaned, applied with the wound medicine that Leonard was carrying, and then wrapped with a cloth strip. Susan watched Lance's treatment of the veteran on the side and couldn't help but look at the wound on her wrist. The lord in front of her would do such a thing for a stranger, even cutting open her own clothes to bandage the wound on a dead person. This busy meal completely consumed Lance's remaining gift, but it was only to stabilize the injury. Fortunately, the veteran's condition stabilized, and at least his breathing began to become smooth. There were obvious fluctuations in his chest, which could be considered as buying time. To completely heal the injury, more gifts and time are needed, which means he needs to kill and sacrifice. The people above the territory are suffering, and we must take measures as soon as possible. Lance frowned and looked at Susan, who had the best understanding of the situation in the town. I need your help. I understand. In Susan's already calm gaze, flames of revenge began to emerge. The night in Hamlet town comes particularly early, and for the town residents who generally do not have nightlife, sleeping is the only activity. At least after sleeping, they will not be so hungry. The difficulty of nighttime movement is due to the relatively poor lighting methods in this world, mainly using candles or oil lamps made from containers filled with animal oil or resin, as well as using torches dipped in animal oil and resin for illumination. Ordinary people use paraffin, while those nobles use beeswax, which burns without black smoke. But for those mercenaries and thugs, their nightlife has just begun. Ha ha ha. You didn't see that. At that time, I punched a bandit and flew him away. A burly man in the tavern waved his fist, and no one dared to question his thick arms, even though everyone knew he was flying a townsman blocking his escape. Those mercenaries and thugs drink and boast in taverns, or spend the night with a prostitute, and some even break into the homes of the townspeople and forcibly occupy women. I'm afraid they didn't expect such a good thing after the bandits isolated the town. Although they ran away, they survived, while those who chose to fight with the bandits actually died. A commotion ended, and the mercenaries left each other, leaving only a mess in the tavern, as if it were almost every night. But tonight is not destined to be so peaceful. Don't you go play for a while. Cut it. If I have money, why don't I go find a woman? The mercenary who had a chance encounter with Lance today walked out of the tavern, feeling slightly tipsy, only to think of the women in the brothel who even wobbled as they walked. He was a lazy guy in the town before the bandits arrived, but after the bandits left, he became a sheriff. However, the oppression of the people remained persistent and even intensified. And just as he passed by the street, one hand reached out from behind and pulled him by the neck, dragging him into the dark alley. Who? The thug panicked, but the next second he was covered in his mouth by one hand, struggling only to find that his hands were restricted. Disma wanted to dispose of it, but was stopped by Lance. Instead, he handed Susan a dagger he had previously seized. Go ahead and take back everything you have. Susan took the dagger without much hesitation, and driven by hatred, she went crazy and inserted it into the thug's body. One knife. Two knives. The intense pain made the thug struggle fiercely, but it had no effect on Leonard who was holding him. Enough, he's already dead. Lance pushed Susan forward and casually offered her body as a sacrifice. After venting, Susan didn't say much, but she felt even more silent to Lance. However, she didn't forget her task and took them to the next place according to the plan. According to Susan, there were over 30 security officers under the mayor's command, of which the real combat power was the 20 or so mercenaries, and the rest were all thugs familiar with the local situation. If it's normal, it's really difficult for those people to get started living in hotels or guilds. But the bandits destroyed those places, let alone indulging in alcohol and sex, lingering outside, giving them the opportunity to take action. During the day, besides resting, Lance and the others were still using Susan to locate those people, waiting for them to be buried tonight. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Mercenary Leader. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Mercenary Leader. Under Susan's leadership, Lance set his next goal, a drunken thug. Lance used a dagger to cut through the thug's throat, and blood spurted out. No matter how much he resisted, it could only turn into a corpse. Raising his hand to offer it as a sacrifice, Lance looked at the blood stained on his hand but didn't feel much. He picked up clothes on the ground, wiped away the bloodstains, and then casually threw them away. In this world, if you don't adapt, you will be ruthlessly abandoned. Among the more than 30 security officers, all the mixed fish and thugs have been eliminated, leaving only those mercenaries. The next one is the leader of these mercenaries, who has armor and weapons stolen from the veterans. Be careful. Picking a soft persimmon and pinching it in front, but at this moment, he went against the trend and directly approached the leader who appeared to be the strongest among these mercenaries. Lance does not underestimate mercenaries just because he harvested some mixed fish thugs earlier. These people are always between life and death. Although they cannot be compared to Disma and Leonard, there must be something to survive, and their vigilance is not comparable to those thugs. But these people are like frightened birds when they experience bandit invasions. As long as they take the strongest one, even if their actions expose the remaining mercenaries, they will not dare to attack him. This is their nature. If we start with other mercenaries, once he escapes, it will unite the remaining mercenaries under the leader's command, and our own plans will also be hindered. Lance knew he was taking risks, but he believed their strength could bring him victory. The mayor specially sent him a brick and stone structure house in order to gain the support of the mercenary leader. When Lance and the others came over, they heard the woman's violent screams and howls. This person has a perverted habit. Although he is tall and sturdy, he is short and weak below. Only by abusing others can he feel pleasure. And these days, 3 women have already died at his hands. These words were spoken from Susan's mouth, and Lance could feel the resentment in her words, and couldn't help but close his eyes slightly. Hands on. Disma had been struggling on the ground floor for many years, and this kind of door lock couldn't stop him at all. He easily opened the door, and the others followed the sound to touch it. It has to be said that the woman's wailing and the leader's wild laughter just overshadowed their movement towards the past. Even if they had already arrived at the door of the room, the leader had no reaction. At this point, there was no choice to back down. Lance and the 2 exchanged a glance and whispered a warning. "I'm still useful to him, try not to kill him." Leonard lifted his sword and kicked open the door, then rushed in. Disma followed suit with a short sword and a short gun. Lance raised his hand to stop Susan from wanting to enter, and took a slow step before entering the room when he heard the screams and chaos of a woman coming from inside. The already small room suddenly became crowded with a few people, and Lance could only see a fat man with a bare upper body holding a whip, barely blocking Leonard's chopping. On the other side of the room, a bald woman was tied to a wooden frame, with whip marks all over her body. And in the moment when Lance was distracted, Leonard's long sword cut off the whip and struck the leader's shoulder. It has to be said that his fat body is not as long as White, and he actually carried it down with a roaring bear hug. If he held it firmly, it could really break the person's waist. Unfortunately, Leonard's skills honed on the battlefield were even more exquisite. He lowered his hands and stood his long sword in front of him, pressing it forward. The leader's embrace seemed more like putting his neck on the edge of the sword to Lance. The leader also realized this, but he was also a ruthless person. He knew he would definitely die if he distanced himself. Now that there was still a chance of survival after risking his life, he reached out and grabbed the sword body to move it away. At the same time, the sharp blade cut open his palm, and if he hadn't released it quickly, his fingers would have been cut off. However, his actions were effective, his neck avoided the blade, and Leonard had already entered his range of attack with both hands. The leader was confident that his strength, even armor, would be difficult to resist. But some things are often relative, and he has also entered Leonard's attack range. I saw Renard suddenly lift his hand and tilt his sword back. His long sword in the narrow room was unobstructed, and his hidden handle was like a venomous snake spitting out a message, instantly striking the leader's chin hard and causing him to fall backwards. The biggest taboo on the battlefield is to give the enemy a chance to breathe. Leonard wouldn't make such a mistake. He used his sword handle to make up for it twice and completely knocked him unconscious. He didn't forget to press his long sword on his neck, and any slight movement of the leader would be a confusing outcome. If the leader wears complete equipment, he may still have the power to fight, but now facing Renard is completely a dead end. It's not that Lance wants to keep him, it's still useful. I'm afraid he has already been defeated by the Sword Lord. Disma was originally eager to rush in and have a big fight, but the place was too small and the boss was forced into a corner. He couldn't get past it and could only watch Renard pick peaches. Don't worry, it's still growing tonight. Lance comforted him and came to the woman tied up on the shelf. Come and help. The two of them untied the woman and placed her on one side of the bed. Unexpectedly, there was no intact skin all over her body, and there were bloodstains from whipping and bruises caused by blunt instrument strikes. It's really not human, Disma couldn't help but curse when he saw the scars on the woman's body. The woman's face was filled with fear as she looked at the intruders, and her first reaction after being rescued was to huddle in bed trembling. Don't be afraid, we're not bad people. Lance didn't mean to waste too much energy on her. After leaving a sentence, he came to the leader and the three of them worked together to drag him up and tie him to the wooden frame. The props he used to torture others have now become his own shackles. Lance checked and found that the whip blocked most of the force. The injury on his shoulder was not serious, and the injury on his hand was just like that. After calming down, Susan walked up outside and couldn't help but question the scene. Why not kill him? Don't you think it's too cheap to just kill him like this? Lance sneered. He not only wants to kill, but also to execute his heart, using this scumbag's life to establish his authority. Susan remained silent, but although she was puzzled, she still chose to listen. You come take care of her. Toss the woman to Susan, while Lance searches the room with Disma. I quickly found a set of armor, as well as a hammer and shield, which should be the equipment of the veteran. End of this chapter.